Today is Friday, October 15th. Today we celebrate the memorial of Teresa of Avila, one of my top favorite saints, along with Ignatius and Francis Xavier. She attracts me because of her great courage in taking on the reform of existing Carmelite monasteries in Spain in the mid-1500s, calling them to a stricter observance of prayer, silence, and poverty, as well as establishing new monasteries on the same model. As you might guess, the opposition to her reforms was horrific, but she was a great diplomat and a deft bureaucrat with connections at the Spanish court that she did not hesitate to exploit to advance her work. I wonder if she was in any way influenced by Machiavelli's book, The Prince, that was published only 2 years before she was born. His influence among the nobility may have spread from Italy to Spain and might have given her some pointers on dealing with recalcitrant clerics, courtiers, and nuns. Teresa was born in 1515, and so was about one generation younger than Ignatius, who was born in 1491. There is no record of Ignatius and Teresa ever meeting or even corresponding, but they shared a mystical spirituality, and her finally encountering Jesuit spiritual directors helped her to realize that her mystical experiences were real, and they gave her relief from the carping and the criticism of diocesan clergy. She then in turn was the main spiritual director to John of the Cross, who was born a generation later in 1542, and whose mystical experiences caused him much grief in his own Carmelite community. Judging from her accomplishments and her prose style, she must have been quite the extrovert and quite the persuader and bureaucratic infighter. So, unlike Ignatius, who hated the idea of writing anything about himself and who burned most of his diaries at the end of his life out of an obsessive, compulsive fear of the sin of pride, Teresa has given us a rich entry into her own spiritual life. In thinking about Teresa, we must not miss her mystical side. She entered the monastery to spend her time in prayer, contemplation, and spiritual reading. What a shock it must have been for her to have to spend so much of her life in active service. People who are hesitant to engage God in the spiritual life tell me that they are afraid of what God might ask them to do, on the assumption that they think God would ask them to do things that would make them miserable. This attitude reflects their not yet knowing God as a God of love, who will love them first and then send them out to do important work for which they have the necessary gifts and which end up producing much good for people. Teresa must have lived in the sense that on the one hand, she would rather be in her monastic cell praying, but that on the other hand, she realized that she was undertaking a mighty work at God's invitation, that she would influence many people for the years to come. And so she did. And she's a wonderful mentor and model for us as we engage with the struggles of the spiritual life. Teresa must have known and lived by the text that we hear in our reading today from St. Paul, a reading that is special for her feast day. Romans 8, beginning with verse 22. We know that all creation is groaning in labor pains even now. In hope, we are saved. Hope that sees for itself is not hope. For who hopes for what one sees? If we wait for what we do not see, we wait with endurance. So let's follow St. Paul and St. Teresa today asking for the grace of enduring as we groan for relief along with all of creation. Yet, choosing to live in hope for what we do not see, but what we can hope for, because we trust in God's love for us and for all creation.